Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. This is your boy Letlhogonolo. Unfortunately, I'm recording all the way from the United States, and that means that I'm not going to record with my beloved Dr. Slay, aka Dr. Alma, aka Dr. Everything. But I'm excited for the episode. It's been such a wonderful time coming to America, but been particularly coming to New York and connecting with wonderful people. And I think today is particularly important because, we have like the privilege of actually reviewing a book that hasn't actually been published yet or is out in the market. So that's quite exciting. And I know a lot of time, like, people speak about this idea of, people are taking up space and there are certain, you remind me of this person. But I think, like, I keep reading the works of James Baldwin and thinking how important he is as a person. And I think that the person who we're going to be talking to today reminds me of the kind of work and the kind of importance that James Baldwin had for his generation. And I feel that the writer that we'll be having today is of the same caliber, like will be as important as James Baldwin in this generation. So today we'll be talking to Darnell. Hi, Darnell.
What's up?
How are you doing?
Good and cold.
It is quite cold here. I mean, I've never experienced these conditions
freezing,
where I come
right?
from. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
or
for
for
having
joining me. So I guess firstly, like, for anyone who doesn't know who Darnell is, one of the first questions is, who is Darnell?
Yes, I am a child of Camden, New Jersey, which is an urban, predominantly black urban city here in New Jersey, in the States. I am a writer. I guess I would consider myself an artist. I try to use whatever tools that I have at my disposal to push out in the world the type of work I think is can move us along in this sort of trajectory of black liberation. So whether that's writing, whether that is teaching, whether it is working in media, so which as a media maker, whether it's working behind or in front of the camera, I try my best to do all of this. I don't know. It's always hard to sort of name a thing or a way to describe myself, but yeah, I guess I would say I'm an artist, a creative.
I mean, so we're here to talk about, No Ashes in the Fire,
Yes.
Which is your memoir. And I was really intrigued by the title. Do you want to, like, tell me a bit about how you got to choosing the title?
Well, I'm a church boy by heart, and I grew up very much part of the sort of Pentecostal evangelical tradition. So this story sort of draws from that, but I literally, about a third into the book, had been writing, but I still didn't have a title.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the shower, and I prayed to Spirit, to God, to my ancestors. And I was like, what is the book? What is the name? I need a name for the book. And the title, No Ashes in the Fire, came to me, which harkens back to one of the stories in the book that I tell. When I was a teen, I was jumped by a group of neighbors, a group of boys who doused me with gasoline, and one of them attempted to light a match that just serendipitously didn't light. So it was a sort of play on that. It is to say that sometimes when many of us who are black, who are also gender nonconforming or queer, or who are considered the others, are often confronted with these situations where we're literally, metaphorically and not so metaphorically, are nearly set on fire, but so many of us come out alive and survive. So there was no ashes that day. So this was a play on that, a way of hearkening to, or a way of lifting up black survival, black queer magic, survivability, livability in the midst of circumstances that might have otherwise taken us out of here.
Ooh, that's quite deep. I think that, when I was reading the book, I personally have to say, I think, honestly, it's one of the best books that I've read in my life.
Oh my gosh.
Because I think that even
Stop
though...
it. Oh, now I'm blushing. That's really sweet. Thank you.
Even though you're talking about, like, you growing up in America, this could be a story of any person, any queer black person in South Africa, any queer gender non-conforming person in South Africa. There were particularly a lot of similarities, which we'll go into in a bit, but particularly a lot of similarities about my own story that I found myself in that. in ways that I haven't found myself in any other story. You know, I didn't go look far when I was immersed and engrossed in that story. So I think firstly, like, thank you for your vulnerability.
Sure.
You know, I'm reminded of what Audre Lorde says. She says, you know, your silence will not protect you. And I feel in some ways that is where you were going with your story, right? Transforming what Audre Lorde says from silence into transformation.
Absolutely.
And so I want to know, like, before we go into the chapters of the book, like, who are some of the writers that inspire you? Who are some of the writers that you draw your inspirations from? Who are some of the writers that have shaped your life?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. I would definitely name Audre Lorde. I was shaped politically, and I say politically because that also informs my art. My creative pursuits are not at all separate from my politics. And I was greatly shaped by Black feminists, particularly Black lesbian feminists like Audre Lorde. Zami was a book that just is one of the most under-celebrated, remarkably written text out there. But I've learned from Audre Lorde. I learned from Cheryl Clarke, who is a Black lesbian scholar and poet, June Jordan, Barbara Smith, M. Jackie Alexander, who is a Black transnational feminist who is a peer of Audre Lorde, who's writing actually her book, Pedagogies of the Crossing, was pivotal in my development as a writer. She really appealed to tapping into the writerly gift as an extension of spirit work. So she communes, and you know, her cosmology is such that she communes with her ancestors as she writes, and it's just a remarkable thing. Certainly James Baldwin, but I would come to James Baldwin after I came to people like Audre Lorde. Essex Hemphill, Joseph Beam, who I think I also got to through Black lesbian feminists. Essex Hemphill and Joseph Beam were United States-based Black gay writers who wrote really phenomenal text in an age and time when Black gay writers' voices were still not seen or heard as part of a larger canon of African American literature. So those are folk I say, like, I hearken when I write. I am thinking about not only their political statements, but the form. I don't want to take away from. I come to know who I am as a Black queer person in the world through their work, but also the form, their art form should not also be under recognized. They were talented writers. So those are folks that I think right away come to mind.
And I think it's interesting because in the beginning of your book, you know, in the prologue, you speak about the idea of. I'm reminded the quote of Toni Morrison. She says.
Toni Morrison, I should name too, of course. Yes.
Where she says, you know, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written, you have to write it.
Yeah.
And I think this is the book, right? For me, particularly, it's a book that I don't think exists, right? And which is important. So I want us now to start going through the chapters.
Sure.
Guys, like, firstly, you need to get on this book. Like, I swear to you, it will change your life. So the first two chapters are Passage and Ripples. And I want to speak particularly about the relationships that you had with your parents, right?
Sure.
Right? So honestly about your parents. I think what was important for me, you know, I lost my mom 2 months ago. And in losing my mom 2 months ago, I started a blog. And in writing about the blog, I wrote a piece about healing. And a piece about healing, a piece about fractured relationships, you know, just an honest piece about, like, the relationship that we have with our parents. Because I feel sometimes when our parents pass away, people create these understandings of who they are and they don't give the full spectrum of the type of relationships that we have with them.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a bit about, like, you know, the relationship that you had with both your mom and your father?
Yes. So those were probably the first two chapters were probably the hardest to write. One, because my father died. He passed away the month before I really jumped into writing the book. So as we buried him, I was in the midst of writing. But I Okay, so before I wrote the book, I would say my relationship with my father was very strained. I disliked him. And at probably some point in my life, I would have said I despised or hated him. But it's sort of, serendipitous is not the word to use. I think it was a lesson and movement of the spirit that allowed me to embrace him before he left, before he transitioned. So I was at his deathbed. Which helped me to come to terms with the man who did so much foul shit in my life, right? Who I witnessed do foul shit in my life, from the abuse that I was subjected to. You know, he abused my mom and just his absence and a bunch of different other things. Through journeying with him through his transition allowed me to see him as a human being, and not the monster that I had depicted him out to be. It allowed me to see him in a more complex way, so that I could look at him and hold the bad shit that he did next to the good things too. And that allowed me to write him in the book as a more humane, as a human being, not as a monster, to be signified as a monster. And it actually helped me to be a bit more honest about who I am in the world. I mean, I look at him, I can't castigate him as like someone who was wholly bad, and not look at myself and see, in the book I talk about me being an ellipses of his presence, right? Like, I am him, and I have just as much shit going on with me too. My mom, so they had me very young. My father was a boy. They were boys and girls. They were 15 and 16 when I was born. And I have to stop sometimes and think about what that means. And I did not stop and think about it until I was writing. To think, oh, I gave him a lot of shit for being a fucked up dad. And he had me as a boy who was 15. And 15, I was like, I didn't even know how to pee straight. You know what I'm saying? And like, here I am judging this man, for a boy, for the failure of raising a child when he was in the 8th grade. My mom was in the 9th. I have a very close relationship with my mother. She actually, without even knowing it, she's never used the word feminism. I doubt if she would identify herself in that way, but she became, and it's from a very early age, it was because of her that I really had, I guess, an attentiveness around the needs of black women and girls in my life. I'm surrounded by a bunch of black women. That's all that's in my family, is like black women and girls. So if I've come to like a feminism, she was that before I even got to Audre Lorde and before I got to Cheryl Clark. So the first 2 chapters are about me wrestling with their humanity.
And I mean, it's interesting because like what I drew from them was like this idea of also emotional accountability, you know. I remember the particular scene where, you know, after you called for help, your mom then slapped you, you know, because she was embarrassed, you know. And it just reminds me of like the relationship that I had with my mom, because my mom was also subject to domestic abuse. And it's just like the story of these black women who stay in these marriages, right? Sometimes loveless marriages, but also stay because, one, they need the support, and also society hasn't created systems for black women to get out of abusive relationships. We ostracize them, you know. In South Africa in particular, what happens is that there's this phenomena of telling black women to stay, you know. It's hard, but you have to stay, you can fix it. And I really enjoyed the honesty with which you spoke about like this emotional accountability. Like, I was helping you, like, why are you beating me?
I was so mad at her for years.
But at least she apologized, because in some ways our parents don't do that.
That was just a few years ago though, by the way.
Like recent few years ago. I mean, it's still like, I think
and no, it's an important thing that she was able to. It was sort of like, you know, she had to come to a space of emotional intelligence. I like this term, emotional accountability. She had to get there. And honestly, my mom, when she read this, she called me and said that most of the stuff she forgot. Like I would interpret it not as necessarily forgetting. It was willful forgetting, or maybe very helpful, constructive forgetting, in order for her. That's what trauma does. Like, you have to block. You purposefully block some things out so you can live. But she forgot most of that stuff. I have, you know, very particular scene. There's a scene where I talk about like her being beat up because she brought us too many Christmas gifts, and she totally forgot that happened.
That was also quite deep, right? Also, just the idea that this, and I think also what was interesting for me is, your commentary on like black masculinity, in particular in the context of black fatherhood. Because I remember when my stepfather didn't used to work and my mom would always provide, there's also a sense of like I have failed as a man and therefore I have to assert my dominance in some other way. So I really enjoyed that commentary just about like how as black men we have to be accountable for the shit that we do, right? So we have to be careful to, you speak later on in this book about, the state as patriarchal, the street as patriarchal, the home as patriarchal. But just that to constantly be aware of where we are, because we can't just be asserting dominance where we come from.
Right.
So that was really, really, I think, amazing for me. And then the chapter about magic, it's interesting. Like every single chapter, I'm like, wow. Like it's really insane how similar like our experiences have been. Do you want to tell me about like, elementary school and like what happened? Because, in the chapter Magic, you speak about that and, some of the steps that you had to take, rock up to the principal's office to be like, I need to go to AT, right? Because I'm smart. Like, look at this report.
I was determined. So, part of the challenge of writing a book, writing a memoir, part of the challenge of writing my memoir is I had to be honest about the fact that I saw a lot of violent shit, things that, but here's a task. I wanted to try my best to sort of write for the reader honestly, and I have to honor quotes here. Like, so Ta-Nehisi said once, when somebody asked him, so what advice would you give someone writing a memoir? He says to not fucking lie. So for me, that's really important because on one hand, I didn't want Camden this type of United States ghetto, black city to be read as a space that's only ever understood through a gaze of like violence. But at the same time, I mean, when you're 18 or 16 and you've seen or witnessed, I don't know, how many people die before they're 18. And in the type of way that those deaths become so mundane that you stop feeling them. Like that is a pervasive, and I wanted readers to get that. I wanted them to feel like that, yeah, we danced. And, I went to school and I got all A's and I smiled, but that was not at all in the absence of this mundane, everyday type of devastating, these unseen hands, right? I talk about in the book that are always at work. So that book was, I talk about magic because I'm thinking like that requires not necessarily supernatural, it requires it requires all of the shit that we have in us as human beings. It requires us to pull on all of that. If you're living in circumstances that have multiple arrows shooting at you all the time to live, to fucking, like, what does it take to get up and go to school when like, I think I was in 8th grade when these 12, like, the boys that were in 12th grade stopped me on the bike. I would never forget this, and like just started punching me in my jaw. And I'm laughing because I'm like, I can't believe that I got up the next day and went back to school. And somehow, in a school district that lacked all of the resources necessary for us to gain a type of education that would put us on level playing field with our counterparts in the suburbs, we still got A's, we still thrived, we still went home. And that's what that chapter is about, right? Like how so many of us who are black, who are brown, who are queer, who are gender nonconforming, who are the other, who live under these conditions, not only under the state, but within our own communities where there's like intra-communal violence, do what we must to fucking live. And part of that comes, and I think this is I don't know if this is a strength. So many of us do it because we do it, we have to dream existences different than the ones that we're in. And we do whatever the fuck we can to get there. Now, what that means is, I would hate that we have to pull upon our strength merely to survive so that we can get to a space where violence is not always in our doorsteps. But I often look around at black queer folk that I was around, and so many of them were successful. Not all of them survived, but what I mean by successful is that they graduated, they went off to college, they went off and got jobs, and I was thinking, because they were fighting to get away from these spaces where they were being literally, people try to do away with them. So that book is like about, and I mean, magic. I mean, I wish we were fucking magicians and supernatural, but no, our magic comes in the strength that we pull in our everyday. That was a fun chapter to write.
I think for me, what really stuck me was the encounter of one of the teachers who told you that you cannot write.
Oh my God.
That
white woman teacher, I will never forget. I've said, the lawyers told me I couldn't say her real name, even though I've written her real name in other places. Probably sue me.
So I remember when I started working at a law firm as a junior candidate attorney, there was a white woman similarly who told me, like, you know, don't they teach you how to write? Like, you don't know how to write. And that memory has stayed with me until now, right? So my question is, do you suffer from the imposter? And do you think that particular encounter is something that constantly, like, you know, because for me, every time I have to write something, like, people know, like, I'm like, I hate my writing, just because I'm reminded of this woman who told me that I'm not a writer.
Oh, for the longest time, her voice would be in the back of my head. I hadn't actually identified myself as a writer until within the last several years, like the last decade, and I'm old, so that means 30 or so years after having written and published in academic journals and media. I was too afraid to name myself a writer. In some ways, I actually think, looking back, I'm not sure what her intent was. That was wrong. But she's also the same person that presented me with an award. I had won a contest for like a poetry writing contest, which is strange. I don't know if she was trying to push me by being rude, but it you know, it isn't just Miss. I was going to say her real name, but I won't. It isn't just her voice, but I think for black folk, period, and maybe black queer, like, there's something about the enterprise and industry of writing, particularly like the industrialization of it. So many of us come from oral traditions. So many of us, you know, the publishing world, the writerly world, the world of MFA is not necessarily home to us. And it's you know, so shit, and it isn't one of those things. I often say, you know, we're asked I have a lot of problems when people say, well, what do you do? Because typically most people want to know, what is it you do to make money?
Yeah.
So writing hadn't been one of those things that I ever was told was a possibility. I never thought that I would be able to live well off of words. So yeah, I struggle with that. I struggle all the time. The book is done.
Yeah.
You read it. Every day I'm like, is this shit good? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I can tell you, it's very good.
Even after you would tell me that, I would still.
So this is also something that I struggle with, and maybe we can have a conversation about this, right? I have realized that sometimes I do things because I think I want affirmation.
Yeah.
But then I get affirmation and it's still not enough, because I'm like, but then my question is, like, what am I looking for? Like, what more? What more?
Part of what I know now, and the thing that I think makes me feel that I ground myself in, I remember why it is that I wrote this book and who I was writing for. So there are people that are going to love it, there are people that are going to hate it, but I was writing, in my mind, there is like an audience of black young people who, and like the type of young people who may not be able to find themselves so accepted in a lot of the spaces that and like, I was writing for like 16-year-old me, quirky and just like totally like mesmerized by the world, wanting to know, trapped in so many ways by circumstances, forced to dream because of like your reality, like knowing that there's something different, a way of being, a way of living that was different than what you're experiencing, your desires are muted. Like, so that's the person I was writing for. So for me, my sense of comfort comes from knowing that possibly this book can fall into that person's hand, which is different than the white critic or the black critic, for that matter, who may or may not find it reaches sort of height of what they consider to be art form or whatever. Like, we gotta remember why we do this. And I didn't come to writing to get like awards. My first piece that I ever published was in an academic journal, and it's so obtuse. It's like, I probably wouldn't even, it's like in an international journal of black theology or something like that. But I didn't write that because I was like attempting to be accepted by a canon. I wrote it because there was an absence of, in this time in my life, a particular type of theology that spoke to me as a black queer person. That shit wasn't there, so I wrote it. And at least it wasn't there in sort of the full breadth of scholarship. So I see writing, and it sounds so basic, but it's true, as I call it intellectual activism, not intellectual meaning smarts, but an exercise of cognition, an exercise of the heart. And in the same way that one can move crowds or move people to think differently by disrupting things, and as an organizer, is the same way we can do it with words. So that's the work for me. And that's what grounds me. I have to remind myself that all the time. Like, why'd you write this? There are people that write books because they want to make a bestsellers list and they want like a good award. Like, I feel like if you concentrate on the purpose and the beauty, that other shit may possibly come. But that's not the motivation, right?
Yeah, I think also like that's what I've employed in what I've also been working on, like just an honesty, because I think there are people out there who deserve my voice, or who will benefit from my voice because you come at it from a different perspective. And like you said, you're writing for a particular audience, so fuck whoever is not going to enjoy it because it's not for them anyway.
But interestingly enough, you will find that people, I guess I'm a bit shocked, because it's a very parochial, it's very specific. Like, Camden is a character, right? Yeah. It's a very specific character. Yeah. So to read that and find resonances with what may be happening, say, in South Africa is pretty remarkable. But I think that's the beauty of writing, the beauty of literature. Right? Yeah.
And also, like, I think a global blackness, right? That blackness plays itself out differently, but it's actually the same anywhere you go.
Yeah, like, I felt mad cool when I was walking through Joburg. I was like, what's good? Yeah, this is like home, right? You know what I'm saying?
I think now we can talk about your favorite chapter, Touch. What I really enjoyed about this chapter was when you spoke about Jason. And the way in which you spoke about the relationship that you had with Jason. I've been like talking about this for a couple of years now, like just the idea of having male intimacy, but it's non-sexual, because I don't think people can understand that. So can you talk a bit about like what you perceive male intimacy to be?
Yeah, that was, I love that part, because that is a type of intimacy that defies categorization, I think, and it isn't, and I would not even call that queer.
Yes. Yeah.
Because to say it's queer is to say that this is not the way that people identified as men can be in relationship to one another. That these types of forms of connections don't exist, and they do. And that particular story is about a friend of mine. We were in high school. That particular part of the story. And we would just go to sleep next to each other every night, and he would ask his mom if he can stay over at my house. Now, what's interesting about this, I was living, I come from a big family, and at this time, my mom, and my sisters and I were living with my grandparents. Everybody was living with my grandparents, and we used to sleep in the basement. I slept in the basement, this horrible basement, and for some reason, he wanted to stay with me every night, as much as he could. His girlfriend lived across the street, by the way, who was my best friend. But we would be sleeping. I would be against the wall, and this is like clockwork. He would be moving closer, and closer every single night. So we were holding one another. But we never talked about it. We never even talked during those moments. And for me, it was such a remarkable reflection on what's possible. What's possible, like what a type of humanness um, that can exist between people who are identified as men. I'm saying that specifically, right? Because I think that identification is what limits us from being intimate in those ways. Like, what did that mean for us to be sleeping next to each other like that every night? Like, what were we like, we were not just holding each other. We were holding each other, but we were holding so much else. And those embraces got me, like, I needed them. He needed them. I mean, only once did he, like, maybe more than once, did he joke around, like, and make sexual
well, you know, joking but not joking.
I knew it wasn't joking. I knew he wasn't joking, and I was like, he's not really joking. But I was too much of a punk to do anything. I wanted to. He probably wanted to as well. But I've experienced that sort of one. I mean, but I've had experiences like that with guys, and I sort of miss that. I miss the innocence that comes along with, like, there isn't a need for the box. There isn't a need to call it any, like, this thing that just is there. That I think it's pretty remarkable.
You also speak about, like, what I found really exciting about queerness as magic, because I'd never conceptualized, you know, like, my queer identity as magical, because in the society that we live in, like, to be black and to be queer is like to quicken my death. I'm not safe in many parts of the world, you know. In my own continent, like, there's only one country that I can get married in, and the rest I could potentially be killed. So, like, what does this queerness as magic look like? So
my friend Amy Cox, she's a cultural anthropologist. She wrote a book called Shapeshifters, and the choreography of Shapeshifters, the choreography of citizenship, black girls, something along those lines. But she talks about shape-shifting. And what I mean by queerness as magic is if we're born into a world that demands that we comport ourselves to a certain way of being, a certain way of expressing ourselves, that we behave, that we perform and you know, that we live according to the rules. Like, queerness is shape-shifting. It really is, like, having to reimagine how one can be in the world, and it requires agility. It requires a type of whimsical strength and imagination to fuck differently, to love in spite of the potential to be killed, to be free to comport your body, not just sexually, but, like, to fuck with gender is so many ways, like, magic. And I say magic, again, not because it's something that exists outside of us, but it exists within us individually and also collectively, such that it frees other people too. And you also, and I think that that's a remark. Like, that is a thing, you know. Like, we're not just getting free, but we're, like, the shackles are also falling off of others too. Which is, I think about my own family, like, how my ability to be me, to be true to myself, has, like, and I'm not saying that they are queer, and I'm using queer here not to just reference LGBTQ identity. I'm talking about what it means to resist the state. It's a state that you know, you check off, like, are you a boy, are you a girl, like, on a census in the States. It's the rules and regulations around marriage, who's prohibited from, what bodies are prohibited to engage whom, whether that's racially or like, to be queer is to, like, resist all of those things. To be otherwise, as the scholar Sean Crowley writes about here, or Jose Muniz talks about, like, queerness as being the not yet here. Right? Like, so we, those who identify queer politically, are creating new worlds, like communities, ways of being, expressions, and that shit is amazing. And I also like, for me personally, I like the queer identity. You know, like you said, you know, it's political, but also, like, it shows the vastness of
of the spectrum of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes these limiting specific gay lesbian identities are limiting because our attraction is vast. Like we are not necessarily sexually attracted to certain people, but we are engaging in queer relationships in this act of liberation. You know, I remember reading a piece that you wrote about loving black man as an act of revolution, but in particular loving same-sex black man as an act of revolution. And what does that mean? What does the idea of loving black people as revolutionary mean?
So that comes from, it's a line I borrowed from Joseph Beam, who is attributed to, comes from an essay that he wrote, Black Men Loving Black Men is a Revolutionary Act. And in short, to love the thing that has been denied love, or to love the thing that for whom love has been. Yeah, you know, I always say it is so hard to love when you are an object for whom love has been withheld. Or what does it mean to love under the conditions of lovelessness? So when I see black men loving themselves, loving each other, which is to love themselves, that means you are loving the thing that you've been told to hate, to despise, which in my mind is pretty radical. It's now, you know, I say something in there like it's easy to love the thing that is upheld as God, literally, white men, cross, Jesus. It's harder to love the things that have been denied and called the monsters. That's been called the terrorists. That's been called the thing you're supposed to hate. So for me, you know, it's a loving political act for me to be in love with black men. White men don't deserve my love.
Yes, I agree. It is an act, a political act to love black men.
They get enough of that shit.
I mean, we speak now so freely about like our queerness, but I can speak for myself and, you know, reading your book, the difficulty with coming to an acceptance of your sexuality.
Sure.
And just like how, again, like how much similarities there are and how many people in South Africa can relate to, even still are coming to being. So I guess I have two questions. One is, you know, just to relay the story of like the shift that happened in your life, because there were quite like a few instances of things that happened. But also in particularly, I remember the one thing that struck me is, you know, you had this lover and you had been staying together, and obviously
he was tired of my shit.
Yeah. And essentially what happened is just like you were supposed to, you know, I guess it wasn't a condition, but to not love in secret, you know.
It was a condition.
Adele speaks about I'm not going to love you in the dark. And I was thinking about this idea because for me it's twofold, right? On the one hand is I hate the concept of coming out, right? Because it again perpetuates this idea of heteronormativity, that we exist in a system that constantly wants us to perform certain things about ourselves, right? But also understanding that we have to normalize certain things, and the only way to do that. And what are your personal feelings about like the act of coming out, knowing that you obviously had to do it to your mom, which was also quite enjoyable for me because we were just like, I have a boyfriend, and she was like, I know.
I've known for years. Yeah, I stopped using that term. I use inviting in. It's a semantical reframe, but I think it's quite useful. I'm not the only person that have used that term. There's another a woman of color from, I can't remember, and we had both been writing about that at the same time actually. But all that to say, like for me, I place the power. We have agency, and this is the way I liken it. Like, you know, when you have a house, somebody comes to your house, they knock on the door. You know, like, it is my choice because it's my house. It is my house. It's my life. I'm using that as a metaphor here to open the door and let someone in or not. And it requires a few things if I'm going to allow you into my house. Safety, maybe connection. So that is to say, for me, disclosure should not be disclosures contingent upon the person who is owning that house, who owns this life, to feel safe enough to do it, to feel ready to let someone in, and to have the power to say, I can let you in or not. Because in the conditions of sort of heteronormativity, that's not how this shit works, right? Like, straight folk, if we're going to use that term, have all the agency in the world to choose when and when not to let you into their life. There is no demand and an injunction to out yourself such that you can be cast as the abnormal, only to make the person who is deemed normal comfortable. That's what it's about, right? Like, you need me to tell you and verify whatever ideas you have, so it can either confirm your discomfort or make you comfortable. And that's not at all freeing to the person that has to name. So for me, it is about, so I don't tell people, like, if you want to tell, fuck it. Like, if you want to, cool. It's up to you. It's not. So that literally was an invitation. It was an act of hospitality to my mother that I granted her. That's what it is. It's an act of hospitality for me to allow you into the fullness of my life. And it's also, and I use that term inviting in because it also means that it is not then only the queer, the gender nonconforming, the different, the other's job to initiate those conversations, because she now has the opportunity to extend that invitation. She said to me, I've been wanting to talk to you for this a long time. I didn't know how you would feel. So you don't have to wait for me to do it?
Yeah.
And I appreciate Shane. I mean, his was that was a demand. Like, you want to tell her we ain't gonna be together, and I did it.
I mean, what is interesting enough is, like, I have friends who they were dating for 6 years, and in secret, living together for 6 years. And my one friend's parents, like, lived 30 minutes away from the house and, like, never came to visit because, the parents were like, oh, we obviously can't visit because we don't want surprises. And, at the back of parents' minds, it's like these things that they know but they don't want to name.
Oh, yeah.
And my friend, earlier this year, invited his parents into his life. And I think it's the complexity of, like, for me, I think it's different for people of color and black people than it is for certain white people. It comes with religion, it comes with the community. Did we not raise you properly? Like, what's the problem? Because queerness has been constructed as a deformity and a deficiency, like something other. But I also wanted to know how you feel, because, I mean, there's also, yes, it's true, we have agency to invite people in, but there's also the danger of people outing us, because of these precarious positions that we find ourselves in, we go to these internets to seek, because we seek intimacy and we seek them in these sites, and then there's the danger of outing people.
I mean, I don't think we should. So, a couple things. So, the reason why it's important for me to tell the story about my mom, and it's important to give context. There's this understanding, I think, a false one in the United States, that progressivism or folk who are forward thinking tend to be the quote unquote educated. In our minds, that means college educated, of a certain bourgeois class, well read, however one determines and defines that, which is to also say that tends not to be imagined as black people who come from the hood without money. Because it's already assumed, we're already read as being the most homophobic motherfuckers anyway, because of religion, because of tradition, blah, blah, blah. But my mom, when she sat down in front of me when I was 28, she did not have a GED. She had not finished anything beyond 10th grade. She was not reading bell hooks, and she did not use the term intersectionality. She wasn't doing any of that shit. When she said to me, I said, I know, I'm sorry for lying to you and withholding this from you. She said, first of all, you're not lying. Mm-hmm. I ain't do nothing wrong in raising you. This is who you are. I give that example, and it was important to give that example because it was a direct confrontation with this idea that these are the type of people that would sooner be there to reject us. So if my mom, in however she existed, however she's read by society, can look at me and go, ain't nothing wrong ain't nothing wrong with you. And in fact, she said, any institution that sees it, you don't need to be part of it. She was talking about my church. We were part of the same church. So I don't believe that that sort of global blackness or blackness is a sign therefore for non-progressivism or backward thought. That even our traditions, so many of us practice public theologies. Our public cosmologies are different than our private cosmologies and private theologies. So there are preachers who will preach you're going to hell, but let their son come out and somebody called him a faggot. They're going to be on the streets fighting. On the other hand, but to your question about outing, like that's the reason why I say inviting in and about the power of the person to name on their own terms is because even now so many of us, like even those who are queer identified, rush to name and to identify. We do to others what the system does to us. Like identification is wrong because it takes away a person's ability to name for themselves. So when we say something like, oh yeah, that motherfucking Luther Vandross was gay as hell, Luther's dead, Luther if he never said that on his own terms, I don't have a right to insert or to name on his behalf. So outing is just not a problem for those of us who have to face the consequences if someone who wants to do us wrong finds out that we're fucking another person of the same sex or whatever. It doesn't have to be around fucking. It can be our gender presentation. Anytime we usurp someone's power or agency and take their voice if they can speak or take away their ability if they can in any way name themselves, we do it wrong.
And I really enjoyed like the conversation that you had with your mom because she said you're not lying, but then she said and you do these things as a form of protection, right? Because sometimes when people can't live out their full identities because of they find themselves in Soweto, right? They find themselves in, I know, like what a homophobic, but possibly any black community in the United States could be that where you can't name the thing because you put yourself in danger by naming the thing. So I feel similarly about my mom. I think my mom was a progressive person when she was alive and we didn't necessarily have to have the conversation. She was just like, I got you, I see you. And that was important for me, for people to be like, I see you, and that's it, right? Because you walk around, you keep thinking you have to be a certain thing for a long time. That's what I needed to do, I denied myself a certain part of who I am because I felt that let's pray it away, or if I suppress it long enough, it's not going to be. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So maybe I didn't pray hard enough. But also like important because now what I do, I invite people in, it's not even like, let's sit down and have this discussion. It's literally like, oh, so I'm dating X person. And that's it. And that's how you invite people in. It's like, now you're here. And I don't need to tell you if I don't want to tell you, although now it's on a podcast. So that's a little different. I also liked your chapter about becoming. But I think what was interesting for me is the relationship that you had with Ursula. But also like challenging. Because I think in the same way, in recognizing the toxic masculinity, there was also an added burden that was placed on Ursula. Because even though Ursula was subject to the patriarchy, Ursula was the one educating. Ursula was the one who had to hold on and be like, okay, Darnell, this is what we do, this is what we do. And like it speaks just to this idea that we expect black women to be subjugated, to be at the foot and have our butt against their necks, but we still expect them to show up for us. We still expect them to be these black women who will always support us. Oh, yeah. And is that like sort of the relationship and the teachings that you got from your relationship with Ursula?
For sure. Yeah, she would always tell me. That was a period of my life when I was a manipulative. I wouldn't call myself a part. So Ursula and I were friends, but I still had relationships with women at that time. And a few of them would say, like, you using me. Like, and it was so, it just did not even occur to me, like, the way that I had been engaging. I just remember, like, this one time, this girl, like, had brought me all these clothes, and I was just like, oh, shit, like, yeah, like, a nigga done made it, you know what I mean? And that was just, like, it was cool. It was just a cool thing, And that's how I understood it. Like, that's what's supposed to happen, right? Like, you know, you have sex, you lay it down, you know, like, I'm the dude, like, you buy me stuff. And I mean, see, I'm laughing, but it's like, it didn't, Ursula confronted me so many times, and was, another friend of mine, Leslie, who's not in a book, did too. And I so appreciate them. It was hard to stomach. Partly because I understood myself as a better type of black man because, one, I was in college. You know, I had all this sort of like class respectability shit going on then, and I was in the church. So like, I'm now like, I mean, I know about God. I'm telling y'all about God. Like, you know, I'm a good nigga.
Preaching the gospel.
Oh my God, preaching the gospel and dancing with the devil that night. But like, so there was all of these ideas, and it's interesting that I'm talking about this out loud because now I get the resistance to brothers when women say men ain't shit. They say, no, but I'm not
Hashtag
me.
men are trash. Yes, and then they're like, not in my name.
I would have said that then.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm like, what? Like, whenever you need me, I'm here. You know, when such and such said, wasn't I about to whip his ass? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I had all this machismo. And Ursula would always say, like, she would challenge me and hold me accountable. And it would take years. Like, we stopped talking at some points. But it took me years. But even though I heard her, I wasn't really. That change was like, it had to come from a sort of act of consciousness raising within myself. That allowed me, after having done that consciousness raising, where I was able to finally hear her, stuff she had told me years before. But that took years of work, like internal, like aha moments. It took moments like thinking about my father and going, oh, we're kind of not a lot different.
Because I think in the book, you say something beautiful. You say, I thought that acknowledging my errors was the ultimate goal, but naming my wrongs is not the same as working hand to undo them.
Right.
So my question was like, what does unlearning look like to you, right?
It looks like, being in community fortunately with people like Ursula, who was able to tell me the truth. It looks like having to, like, I studied Black women's writings. Like, all I would read at a certain point. But beyond just reading their words, like being in community and being different. So I will say the thing that that had been pushing me throughout my life was, I kept saying, I want to be, I always says, I want to be different than my dad. I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to be that type of man. In my mind, that meant not beating women, not disappearing when they need you. What I didn't realize were the ways that my thinking, my thoughts, and my ideas and understanding about patriarchy were still like very much embedded in me. Unlearning mean that questioning what manhood even means. Me saying, is that even a thing that I want to aspire to? When I say I am a man, what am I saying? What have I committed myself to? What ideas? And backing away from that to the point where I'm like, this category doesn't even work. It doesn't work. It's connected to a bunch of ideas that are harmful. They harm people like Ursula. They harmed. This is why my mom, who I love, like, had to endure what she did. It's because somebody thought the same shit. And those were the things that helped me to be on a path. And I say a path because it's an everyday type of work.
And then related to that, I suppose, do you believe, I speak about this a lot, I don't necessarily believe in allyship, but do you believe that you could be, so I make this distinction in my head, I think that allyship is different from advocacy, right? Do you believe in allyship or do you believe in advocacy, or do you think that advocacy is a subsect of being an ally?
Yeah, so it's a question of like, are men feminists? Sort of like thing.
Sort of, yeah.
And I used to call myself a feminist. I stopped. Only because I would say that I'm pro-feminist, or only because I know that feminism is a politic that is a sort of umbrella that I am standing under that is also indicting me. um, and I stopped saying ally a long time ago. I've recently, over the last several years, started seeing like, like I don't know what we call that where I grew up, but like ally just doesn't get to the type of to be in relationship with someone, a relationship of accountability, and a relationship that can guide us towards transformation means that you have to be willing to give some shit up. I started using accomplice. Because like I think about like my family, and I come from a family where like if one person, I grew up in like a hard. So if one person fight, everybody going like they like, oh, we all fighting, and we all might go to jail, motherfucker. But we going down together. So like I always say like, what are you willing to give up? Like if you're in that type of right relationship or a relationship that's moving towards transformation, you got to be willing to lose some shit. And accomplice to me gets closer to that.
Yeah, that's a different way of thinking about it. I mean, and also it speaks to what you're literally saying. Like, if we're gonna beat someone up, let's do it together, right? And let's get our hands dirty together. I'm all about getting my hands dirty. But I think it also, like for me, how I tend to use the word advocate is that there are places that your penis is important, that women's vaginas or gender non-conforming people or just marginalized people are not able to enter those spaces, and there you have to advocate in ways that they wouldn't be able to activate for, right? So being an accomplice is fighting for them when they need to fight, but being an advocate for me is when they aren't there, they don't have a voice in those instances, then you got to show up, right? But yeah, thank you for that, because I think like now I'm like, yeah, accomplice, I'm in it. In your chapter about return, you speak about, the night when you went to go live your best life, and
on the street.
And you.
I used to do that a lot.
And you came back. Oh, you saw your father again after many years of him being away. How was that for you?
It's a sweet moment. I mean, I laugh at it now. I mean, so, what happens, and I write about this, I am coming home late, and I'm at the public transportation hub waiting for a bus, and this dude comes up in his car. They have hacks, or like fake taxis. It's my father. Pretty much, I hadn't seen him, at this point in the story, I hadn't seen him in years, and he's bragging about me and saying all this shit that I've accomplished. And I was just like, where the fuck you, like, where have you been? Like, can I get a sorry?
Can I get an explanation? Something.
Can a motherfucker get something? You know what I'm saying? So, like, and it's a short ride, but it felt very long because I had a whole internal dialogue in my head while he's talking. Like, he's talking, I'm just like, I have all these questions, like, do you not remember the things that you did? Like, how do you just show back up? Blah, blah, blah. He drops me off and he asks me for money to pay him. And I you know what? There probably were, I've become I'm an empath because I'm Aquarius. But I've also, in so many ways, I've also developed this sort of, I wouldn't call it thick skin. I don't know what it is. There hasn't been too much to sort of like break me to the point where like I cried. I've cried, but I got to a point where I just stopped crying. But that hurt me, like him asking me for money. What I didn't write about was my sister, my middle sister, who's a Leo. After I told her that my dad asked me for money, cussed his ass out. She was so upset. She was like, I know he didn't just ask you. Give me the phone. And she cussed his ass out. But again, when I think about my father, I don't know what it took for him to have to ask his son for $10.
Yeah, I think for me it touched me in a really deep way. My mom died, and I don't know my father.
Mm-hmm.
But last year I decided I was going to talk to my aunt when she was in hospital. I was like, "Hi, babes. So I know y'all have been lying to me about who my father is. So can you show up and tell me?" And she, relays the story about, this is the man, this is your father. And it so happens that there was a funeral, and he would have been at this funeral, and I've never met him. I still haven't met him. And I call my mom and I'm like, "Hey, babes, I hear a certain individual is going to be at the funeral. All I need you to do for me is to go and ask for his number so that I can speak to him, call him and whatever." And she's like, "I'm never going to talk to that man as long as I live." Right? And puts down the phone. And I was angry for a very long time. And now that she's gone, there are all these unanswered questions. I'm like, there is this whole story that I don't know, right? If I decide to pursue getting to know him or wanting to know more about him, I'm going in blind because I don't know what he did to my mother. I don't know the stories. I don't know what happened for her to left, because clearly, it's been 25 years later, and she's still hurt. He must have done some fucked up shit, And when I read that, and when I read the dialogue, it reminded me of that, of just sometimes you just go blind in and you think something is going to look a certain way and it actually looks completely different. He asked you for money.
I know.
I was just like, what? It's no, it's going to be really helpful. No, where have you been? And also, I think I was even more cross that you took out whatever change you had and be here, I was like, what? I would have just walked out of there.
I was dumbfounded. There's a place in the book where I try to really think empathically and put myself in his shoes and think, what would I do if I have convinced myself so many years that I fucked up so bad? That the only way I can live, literally, through the guilt is to forget. Literally, forget that these people exist, forget that these things happen, and go on with life. And I'm certain whatever he needed to do to medicate his pain, whether that was through alcohol or drugs or whatever, or absence. I literally, when he passed, there's I think in the second chapter, I say, me and my sisters, my middle sister, the same when I cursed him out, I made her come back in the room, because she's the hard one. She's motherfucker, I'm gonna hold this shit to death. She just like that. You think I'm gonna forgive you now? Nah, shit, this is dope. But we stood around a bed, and I said to him, he's unconscious, he's on a ventilator, and I say, I don't know, I'm talking to him, I'm I don't know what you had to do.
Yeah, I remember you saying
to convince yourself.
Yeah.
To live, to be okay with knowing that your children are out here in the world, but we forgive you. Let it all go and fly. He passed.
Yeah. I think that was also quite important because, I found out that my mom had passed when I was in the United States. So that was a really, life-changing event so far away from home. But it was her birthday on the November 25th. And my mom really loved the ocean. So I was in Northern California at the time, and I just went to the ocean. I bought red roses, and I stood at the ocean, and I spoke to her. And I said, I forgive you, for whatever. I know our relationship isn't what it's supposed to be. I know we've had a really tough and tumultuous relationship. But please go and rest in peace. You have struggled. I want you to know that I forgive you. And we are here, and we're fine, And I threw these roses into the ocean to be fly, and just to also introduce her to the Pacific Ocean, to be here it is, here I am. And that was powerful for me, just in terms of being for me, I forgive you for me. And it seems like there's this, like, I don't know if you have this feeling, but there's like a shift in the relationship, although people are not here in the physical.
Oh, yeah.
There's like just a different relationship now.
Of course. I mean, I dedicated my book to my dad.
Yeah.
You know, like, there was certainly, you know, I did it for me, and I really did it for him. Like, I know that he was heavy. I could feel it. And I really feel like the relationship we have now, the spiritual one, is what it is because of that transaction, that moment we shared.
And I think also one thing that struck me really is just like what I've been thinking about a lot is, let's say you're pretty accomplished, you've got 3 degrees, and as you said, as you spoke about your parents, they were 15 and 16, right? Not necessarily having any quote unquote qualifications, you know, accolades. And similar to my mom didn't finish high school. She also left school in like the 10th grade because, you know, black families are structured in such a way that she needed to take care of everyone else to ensure that they were going and she would stay behind. But like being in the United States and studying a graduate program in the United States is sort of for my mom, you know. It's the idea that sometimes people even believe that because your parents birthed you, that you wouldn't amount to anything. So in a way, like, these achievements are just constant confirmation to be like, those people created magic.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
So
that black girl and boy, that's I'm their creation.
You know. So it was also like important in that way to be like, you know, sometimes we weave magic out of nothing.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah.
What was really funny for me is when you stayed with the white people. I think for a number of respects, for the longest time, like, you know, colonization really like gets in there, right? Gets in the mind. We are said to believe that when you are with white people, you are good, you know. And I used to believe that, oh, I speak like a white person. I've been invited to their houses. I'm it. Like, don't tell me about these black people because I'm it. White people love me. And then there just came a shift, right, from reading when I started reading a lot, and I was like, wait, hold up. These people are very dangerous. And I enjoyed that when you were like, you had never lived with white people, and now you are living with these people. And, like, it's strange because, like, no one would describe, you know, as we understand society to be endangered by living with white people. On the contrary, you're supposed to feel safe.
Not me. I grew up in a black city, like... all I saw was black people. Like, that's all I saw. I saw black people and Puerto Rican, like, and Puerto Ricans who were also black. Some were black and some were not. Like, I hadn't seen white people really. I had white teachers every now and then. Then I went to a white school in middle school. In high school for 2 years. But I never stayed at a white person's house. I never ate at a white person's dinner table. So, like, my world was very black, which is kind of a beautiful thing, but it also sets you up. I'm not necessarily sure I had the tools when I got to college in a predominantly white institution to deal with, like, the pervasiveness
of whiteness
there. So I was a missionary, an urban youth missionary. That is such a loaded term. And I lived with 12 white people, and I was in this room, and I had a Scottish dude in one bed, and this dude, like this surfer dude from California. I was like, what the fuck? I couldn't sleep I had to be like, I can't do this. It was so much. I was like, Lord.
And also there was a tinge of, like, obviously, for me, I find a lot of, like, white complex savior. Like, here are these people...
Well, you know, it's interesting. I think it was that. And also, though, what I am humble enough to say is, in my absence, in my running away from my city, being at school with other white people, and even on that white campus, I made a very black community, let's be clear. I'm trying to think. I think I had a few white friends, but, like...
do you have white friends now?
Yeah. I'm trying to... Yes, I have white friends. Yeah, I do. Shane, in fact, Shane, well, this is diversion, but Shane, my partner Shane was biracial. His mom was white, and his dad was black. He grew up with his mom's side of family in like the outskirts of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is like where the KKK was still at. They still had KKK marches when we grew up, so I would stay with them, and that was just like a very interesting thing. But I love them anyway. But like, yeah, it was strange. I mean, white. But what I was gonna say is that I haven't been away and going to school, so I can like get money. This is what I was thinking in undergrad. Get money, get the good job, and like come up. Those same white people were the ones who came to my city that I ran from, and were working with my cousins who were reading on like fourth grade reading levels. Really making, I mean, and they were doing after school activities, taking them out to movies and shit. So yeah, maybe savior complex, but on the other hand, I was totally grateful for the ways they showed up for my family when they were in need. I mean, some of my family members are still friends with some of those folks.
In your chapter about lessons, I found that also really important, because you speak about the idea of like now problems in the queer community, and particularly in the same-sex men community. So I've always rationalized like the idea of preference as a form of prejudice. And do you think that, because I guess it's socialization, right, and like the politics of belonging, like you as someone who didn't want to be notably seen as queer would certainly hang out with other, I hate this term, straight acting queer people, so that you're still protected.
Sure.
And how have you navigated the space of unlearning like this toxic preference?
I mean, in short, I know that, listen, most of my friends, so I benefit from this sort of unearned benefit of being able to be safe on the street, to be accepted in certain spaces, communities, because of my gender presentation. Most people read me as like a masculine, black, bearded, certain type of guy. And for them, that type of gay dude is like acceptable. So I know that they like will let me in their space because of the type of way that they read me. And so I have a lot, like, I get allowed into spaces. I actually don't have the same type of trepidation when walking through neighborhoods, because I know that it's likely I'm probably not going to be attacked, but I have a lot of very close friends and family members who don't have the privilege of a masculine gender presentation and performance that allows them the same. So most of the people I grew up with were very, like, suffered in my adult years, physical attacks, a range of different things. So for me, it was in the same way coming to terms with like my privileges as a man, coming to terms with my privileges now as a type of queer guy who I think is often allowed into space and allowed to do certain things and allowed to speak, allowed to live, off of the back of like the way that my body is read, the way that I'm read as a masculine-esque type of guy. It just was that's an everyday learning. I mean, that took me to be in relationship with people who are different than me. It took me, like, one of my first closest friends was, at the time, when I was in high school, I remember I was with a friend who was literally in the midst of a process of legal transition. I knew nothing about trans identity. I was in high school, but Sharon was at my house all the time. And one day Sharon would come in looking like, and then, I mean, would come in with all types of like, I'm like, I can't believe my family not saying anything. Like, Sharon got a bundle of hair now and like breasts, like, and it was just like to see like this process. And I'm speaking in that way because that's what I understood. That's how I read it at that time. It didn't occur to me that like transness had nothing to do with body.
Yes.
but like to see like this sort of presentation bodily and both sort of performative happen without having any language, without any, and then to be in a family that accepted that was pretty remarkable. Mm-hmm. So I learned, I used to hang out with sex workers on the street. I stayed with trans women, and like, I didn't even know what trans was. But I learned about their lives, and I learned, I was hanging out with the ball kids when I was, and people are familiar, so like the ballroom scene here is, a communal space for queer folk, particularly folk who are outside of the sort of mainstream LGBT-esque gaze, right? Like sex workers, young people, homeless folk, and I learned through them.
That's, yeah. And I mean, and I think that's a powerful lesson, because sometimes people read theoretically, but don't actually know what, like, the experiences of trans people are. I was recently in a conversation, and someone was speaking about trans identity as you have to transition. And I was like, hold up. No.
Right.
No. And they were like, what? And I'm like, literally, no. You speak a lot about, like, I remember this particular encounter that stuck with me in the book is when you're about to give the pride speech, and where the man who's cleaning or who's outside, like, keeps...
Call me faggot.
Yeah. And how you reconcile it, you speak about, I've now begun to term this ruthless loving of black people in their messiness. And how does that work for you,
Because it's not easy. So like I also say I was like contemplating if I was gonna jump off of the podium and whoop his ass. So I was thinking about that. Like he was saying that as I'm reading Martin Luther King, and I'm like, that probably wouldn't be cool if I'm talking about justice and I'm like, fuck him up with this microphone. But I inevitably believe now, and I really do think a lot of this started then. Black people come into the world already seen as disposable objects. And I just made a commitment to not dispose of anyone. Now, that's not easy. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even have a perfect formula for what, or a map for what that looks like, or for what it means to me is that if we are already predisposed to disposability, it is not my job to continue that process. So there has to be a way that I can see possibility even in this brother that called me a faggot. There has to be a way I can see possibility even in a dude on an A train that said he was going to shoot me. There has to be a way that I not dispose of OB, that he's the person that like tried to set me on fire. And the book ends with him.
Yeah.
And it ends with me really, I still want to know he's alive.
Yeah.
Like, that to me is sort of what an abolitionist politic gets at, right? Like, if we are... So many of us talk about black liberation, creating a black liberatory future, creating a future that's different than now, without thinking that if we take the same energy, the same hands into that future that have killed us in our now, then we are going to do the same thing then. So I need to really do work at thinking, well, what does justice really look like? Does it look like OB, because he tried to set me on fire, should my family come out and set him on fire? Should they send him to jail? If the jail is a thing, as part of the apparatus that we're saying is a behemoth that's fucking our communities up, do we dispose of him? And if the answer is no, because jail and all of these other mechanisms are dangerous, then I need to decide what the alternatives are. How does one get to a restored relationship? So, he called me a faggot, it's whatever.
And what does black liberation look like to you?
It looks like it's alive. It looks like alive, living under the conditions of economic justice. And economic justice to me looks like folk who are not born to be laborers in the world, but who are given provisions to exercise their creative energies. They are asked and given the ability to do what they love. And it's the doing of what they love that allows them to feed their stomach and other people's stomach. It looks like corporative economics. And it looks like a world that does not exist where the only way we're able to deal with problems is through punishment and retribution. So that we have to be creative around how we are in community with one another and what transformation looks like. And it also looks like divesting from any idea that has come as a trace of colonization, whether that's gender, whether that's sort of sexual mores, whether it's our understanding of class and economics, of the earth, of the universe, of our cosmologies, a total rewriting. But the danger is, right, unless we're in that work of imagining together collectively, we run the risk of purporting imaginaries that can be somebody else's nightmare. Because our imaginaries are going to be so restricted by virtue of our standpoint. And if I'm not sitting with a trans sister or a trans brother or a gender nonconforming person or a disabled person or a person incarcerated who can weigh in and collectively help me dream, it's possible that even in my imagination, they don't exist.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's so important. And what are the top 3 books you would recommend?
Oh, that's so damn hard. Oh my God. Can I give 3 writers?
Sure.
Let me try to do 3 books. That's so hard for me.
Or maybe let's say 3 queer writers.
Zami. Please read Audre Lorde Zami. It is probably one of the most poetic autobiomythographies. That's what she called it.
I co-sign that.
It is like stunningly beautiful. That's one. Excuse me. I really did love Giovanni's Room, even though I had trouble with it because I'm like, here we go again. Like, this motherfucker gotta be like European.
Paris.
But there was the way that Baldwin was able to tap into like the interior lives of these characters and tell this sort of amazing cryptic story. Imagined out of a context that I would never conceive as existing was pretty remarkable to me. Another 3. Well, this is a giveaway. So for the 3rd, I'll say check out anthologies by a group called Other Countries. And Other Countries was established in the 80s and 90s. Black men and some women, mostly black, gay or bi men, who in the sort of hills of in the midst of the HIV crisis here in the States, decided that they would use writing and collectively writing together. They would meet in spaces in New York and workshop their writings as a way of dealing with all of the consequences of HIV. They were losing each other, racism, confronting sexism, so forth and so on. Asada Saint, Colin Robinson, all of these folks who were peers to Joseph Beam and Essex Hemphill even, would get together and they would write. And they have these amazing anthologies that have some of the most amazing stories. I'm talking about in terms of form and content. And so many people don't know they exist. And these are writers that certainly I know make my words possible, even if I didn't read all of them. So Other Countries, their anthologies, Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, and Zami.
So at the Cheeky Natives, we do a weird thing. Like, instead of like giving people popcorn, like 5 stars, whatever, when reparations and when the land comes, we want to give people land.
Yes, give me some land.
So what land would you like? Because, Obviously, I would have given you some land in South Africa. Maybe you do want
Give
some
me-
land in South
I would take
Africa.
land in South Africa.
Okay, let's see. Are you a wine person?
Absolutely. Pinotage.
Okay, so I think we should give you...
And that's South African wine. Have you had Pinotage?
I don't drink.
Oh. You need to like, well, you don't drink, but your listeners, certainly I'm sure they heard of Pinotage. It's the first place I had it was in South Africa. It's the best wine I've had. Anyway.
I think you deserve like at the heart of whiteness. So we'll give you like a wine farm in Stellenbosch.
Okay, do that.
You know, like this is like Stellenbosch is like the architecture of apartheid, but you deserve to be right there on your wine farm enjoying your Pinotage.
Yes, I'll take it.
So thank you, Darnell, for this wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed myself. I hope you did too.
Absolutely. You're the first person I'm talking to publicly about the book, so thanks.
I mean, hey, shout out to Cheeky Natives all the way from South Africa. What? So thank you. Again, okay, people, so this is what's happening. You need to get the book. Obviously, that's very important. Support, buy Black. It's available on Amazon. Will only be published or released in May 2018. But I have a link, and I will link it to the podcast and link it to our page so that you can order it already so we can support Black. Please do not DM the author and be like, hey, Darnell, can I have like a copy? Don't do that. Like, just please support Black, buy Black. And obviously, if you want to follow him, do you have social media?
Yeah, it's all the same. I think it's more Darnell. Moore, Darnell, Darne, 2 L's.
And again, for the last time, for the people at the back, like, what is this book? What is the title of your book?
No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America.
Oh, yes. Okay, people. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you'll get the book. Follow Darnell. Thank you. Bye.